Hello everybody and welcome back to the 20 Years of Women on Boards podcast with me, Claire Braund, the co-founder and CEO of WOB. Today we're talking to Joanna Brand, a senior executive, a lawyer and a company secretary with experience across corporate governance, capital markets, M&A, infrastructure projects across multiple jurisdictions. And in fact, that's the big theme that we're going to be looking at today. It's from birth to Brazil to boards to Bitcoin. She's got companies on her CV that are household names, is a former director of Powerlink in Queensland and serves on arts and culture boards, which of course is one of her great passions and loves in life. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you so much, Claire.
Can you tell us a little bit about your early life and the people and experiences that helped to shape you?
Yes, sure. So I have been thinking I'd like to write a book called I Just Wanted a Normal Life. But anyway, that was not what I got. So it's a little bit of a long story that I'll try to tell quite succinctly in the interest of time. So my dad literally grew up in the cotton fields of Alabama and was, he and his brother were the first two to go to uni in his family. He did engineering and then moved to North Carolina to work on railroads, Mexico to work on railroads, and then Melbourne to work on oil and gas platforms. So he met my mum in the late 60s in Melbourne. 6 weeks later, they got engaged. 6 weeks later, they got married, terrifying, and then they moved to Brazil. So I was born in Brazil, and then they moved to Trinidad. My brother was born in Trinidad, and then they moved to America, and then they moved to Holland, and then they moved back to Australia. And this was all by the time I was 10. And then my dad kept moving, but, he was very big on education. So he wanted us to be in one place for high school. So he was in Brunei, Malaysia, Singapore, the US. So yes, it was quite a different upbringing. I think now I'm a bit older, I always thought about my dad moving around for work, but realised as well how kind of brave and tenacious mum must have been as a, Melbourne girls grammar girl who grew up in the eastern suburbs, sort of taking off to Brazil. And I have heard stories from people about her sort of, stepping over the pig carcasses in the markets in Rio and speaking Portuguese to all the market holders and everything. So, and Dad was away for months at a time as well, either working on deals or he'd be out at the oil rig, things like that. So, it was, I think it made me very adaptable, very resilient. And then it also led to me deciding to move back to the US when I was 17 on my own. So now as a 16-year-old, I think, were my parents insane? Like they just, my dad flew me over there and then it was like, see ya, and for the younger audience members, they have to remember there were no mobile phones, there was no FaceTime. I don't even think I had email when I moved over there. So you'd sort of be on the phone once a week and write some letters and that was it. And then probably the other thing that happened that's really impacted me is both my parents passed away in their 50s. So I'm now turning 55 this year. My dad died when he was 51 and I was 20, and my mum died when she was 58 and I was 32. So very different causes and circumstances, both through illness. I have a lot of friends that seem to think time is on their side, and maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. So, I do try to appreciate every day. And if there's something I want to do, I try to do it and not put it in the later on bucket because, none of us are guaranteed the later on.
What a fascinating story, because, you really don't know where so many people grow up. If you look at their CV and the fact that your mother was, a Melbourne girls grammar school, and then you went on to study commerce law at the University of Melbourne. And then, of course, you went to the States where you did arts and political science at Duke, where you graduated magna cum laude, I may say, and Harvard Law School. You've got several graduate qualifications. You've participated in a range of leadership courses, including the WOB Next Generation of Female Leaders program. So why is education and learning so important to you, and how have your international experiences in particular shaped your career and board choices?
Yeah, look, I think education in my household growing up was kind of the preeminent value, probably because of where my dad came from and, the fact that the opportunities he got were sort of very hard fought. As I said, he and his brother were the first two to go to uni. My dad had to work his whole way through uni. So I think a 4-year degree took 6 years because he was supporting himself. And, so he grew up, like my dad literally drove the bus to school when he was in year 12. Like he was the school bus driver in this small town in Alabama. So so I think for them, you know, to be able to give my brother and I the opportunities that we had, anything we wanted to do education-wise was always supported. And as a girl growing up in the 70s and 80s, I never felt any difference between what my parents thought I was capable of or my brother was capable. They ended up with a lawyer and a doctor, so, you know, in the parental lottery, you know, and those sorts. And people would always say, oh, how did you do that? And I'm like, they literally would just say to us, do something that you love, like, do your best, you know, but it was never an overwhelming expectation of you have to be excellent, you have to get great grades. It was more like, just do the best you can. You know, if you want to be a nurse, be the best nurse you can be, whatever you want to do. And so I do think I probably have some baggage to unpack in terms of, you know, the fact my dad worked so hard and then died quite young. I think for a long time I sort of felt the need to repay all of his sacrifice and his effort and, you know, the work he put in and the time he spent away from all of us to give us these opportunities. I do think there's a bit of, and I'm sure a number of listeners will relate to this, the gold star life, where when you're quite little, you get a gold star and you get exceeds expectations on your, you know, prep report card, and then people pat you on the head and give you another gold star and your parents are really happy and you go, this is good, you know, and you sort of get on that hamster wheel. And I think add in a eldest daughter syndrome and a bit of type A personality, and, you know, that can be a real hamster wheel that you end up on. So my advice would be, and I think the younger generations are better at this than Gen X, is to be a bit gentler on ourselves. And I'm trying to do that now, trying to reform myself a little bit. But I am an intensely curious person. I get bored really easily. So I read a lot and I go to a lot of CPDs, and I'm always thinking about what course I can sign up for. And yes, it's partly to help me with work and my career progression, but it's also just because I get a huge amount of personal satisfaction out of it. And in terms of anything you can do to improve your own self-awareness, I think that's just really key for whether it's success in your friendships, your parenting, your marriage, your work life. I think self-awareness is really, really good. International experiences, you know, I've been back in Australia since '99. I have had the chance to work in a lot of different countries, but I do love when I've had the chance to work with companies with that US angle to them, whether it's a US parent company or a lot of US employees. You know, Australia and US are similar in a lot of ways, but different in a lot of ways as well. Even just down to the idioms that we use and the sayings, you know, a big saying in Texas is that dog won't hunt, which basically means that's not going to work, right? But if you say that dog won't hunt to someone in Australia, they probably do not know what you mean. So I can move back and forth between the cultures very easily. I can change my accent very easily. I don't even notice I'm doing it. If an American rang me right now, I would have an American accent. So I think that cultural facility is very useful in a lot of roles.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. Don't worry, I have a son too who just keeps going, Mum, things are not like they were in the olden days, okay, when it comes to expectations. And I too am in my mid-50s. So I hear you, because I went for the gold star as well. It's like, they don't care about the gold star.
No, they don't.
As I said, no. As I said in the intro, you've worked in well-known companies across banking, energy, retail and aviation in the private, government and listed sectors. What were some of your best experiences working in these companies, and how well did they set you up to move to boards?
So I've always loved what I call a T-shaped role. So you've got your functional accountability, but you're able to be across the whole business. I don't really love roles where your function sort of at the end of the hallway and people will call you if they need you. I have had a lot of people say to me in my career, including in a board context, that I'm not a typical lawyer, and I think they mean that as a compliment. Sorry to the lawyers. You know, I think you have to be able to have an opinion on everything. So one of my best experiences was working for Qantas when I was on the Jetstar executive team, and Jane Herblicker was the CEO there at the time. And if you sat at that table, you better have an opinion on the new seat fit out or the catering menu or, you know, the crisis that was, you know, the volcano in Bali. And you couldn't go, well, I'm a lawyer. It's not my job to worry about the catering menu on the Jetstar flight. So I've loved those kind of roles. And As I said, I've worked very hard, probably in hindsight too hard, but that has given me amazing experiences, whether it's doing a NASDAQ listing. I got to sell a bank. I've dealt with regulator investigations. I've, been able to work in countries like China and PNG and New Zealand and Singapore and Vietnam and Japan. And so it's been amazing. And I think the other thing I've tried to do, and not in the sense that women take on often more than they should, but try to say yes to things that I could. So if it was judging a community service award, or being the internal audit liaison, or being the chair of the OH&S committee, or being on the diversity committee, because I think everything adds experience and broadens, particularly if you've got a strong functional brush that people are going to paint you with. If you can show that you're able to operate outside of that area, I think it's hugely valuable for you if you want to do that, and also in terms of stepping into board roles. Probably some of my best memories are around my teams and helping people in my teams develop. And it was interesting, when I was on the PowerLink board in about 24, we had a few new directors come on, and so we did a bit of an offsite where we all got to know each other. And we had to do an exercise where everyone had to write on a Post-it note what they thought your superpower was. And I'm sitting with Kathy Hirschfeld and Alan Millis, who wrote the National Electricity Code, and, the ex-mayor of Townsville, all these things. And I thought, oh my God, what are people going to say about me? They're going to say, you think about risk, or you're a good lawyer. And I thought, oh God, this is just going to be horrifying. Anyway, I got my little pile, and then you had to read them all out. Every single one of them was about that I genuinely cared about the people in the organization. And I thought, if that is what people take away from working with me, I'm super happy with that. And I then became chair of the People, Safety and Environment Committee. And I think one of the reasons that happened is because people could see that was a genuine passion that I had.
Wow. And I think that's a really interesting point, because I think those skill sets are really coming to the fore when it comes to boards now. We're in just such a disrupted world too. You've served as General Counsel or Assistant General Counsel in some very large and very complex organisations. What's the biggest misconception people have about what the General Counsel or Company Secretary actually does?
Yes. So I don't even think General Counsels necessarily agree on what a General Counsel actually does. So we've all got our own philosophy. So my philosophy that I've always said is General Counsels and legal teams are here to help the business deliver strategic objectives while appropriately managing risk. That's what I like to say. So the word appropriately is doing a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. What's appropriate depends on, what industry and what the regulatory environment is and stakeholder expectations and all of those things. I have met other general counsels who think that the role of a legal team is to give legal advice. So they're very different sort of takes. So I think it's really important, whether you're a lawyer or a director or another thing, ensuring you've got alignment with the person you're reporting to and the organisation more broadly in terms of how they see whatever role you're stepping into. In terms of COSEC, it's an interesting one. I think people can, when my child was younger, they'd often say, oh, my mum's a secretary. I'm like, well, it does feel like that at times. Doing a lot of running around, making sure the director has a green apple instead of a red apple and doesn't forget their jumper, and, everyone's happy with the meeting time and where you're going for dinner, and, picking the lamingtons that are going to get served at the AGM and all of those things. But on the flip side, it's also incredibly strategic, and, you get to work really closely with the board, particularly the chair and the committee chairs, to ensure appropriate governance. And I would have sat in hundreds of board meetings as a COSEC. So getting to sit in those meetings, watch the dynamics, watch how crises are dealt with. And you learn a little bit as well about styles and the people you admire, or that their style resonates with you. And you think, when I'm in a boardroom, that's how I want to act. And also when I'm in a boardroom, that's not how I want to act. So it's a very good learning for that.
I think the role of company secretaries is evolving. I mean, they really are the governance professionals for the organisation. Do you see that changing in the next 5 to 10?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's going to be changing in the next 5 to 10. So I think that will be one of the things. Again, I think it will come down in some respects. Some organisations will evolve more quickly and others might be lagging behind in that. So, understanding how your organisation views that role, obviously with we can talk a bit more about AI, which I'm sure we will, and ESG and cyber and risk and legal and governance kind of all merging in terms of how organizations are planning for the future. I think the COSEC is a really, linchpin, pivotal role in all of those issues. So I think there will be more responsibility placed on those roles moving forward.
Well, turning to the whole issue around the governance around the AI, Bitcoin, crypto, those things, one of your recent roles, or your more recent roles, was at IREN, which operates renewable energy-powered data centres that were originally used for Bitcoin mining and are now transitioning over to AI computing. So data centres are a sector, of course, with a limited regulatory precedent and fast-changing technology. So a couple of things. How does the governance practice adapt when there's no kind of rule book to follow? And what governance risks are specific to crypto adjacent and digital infrastructure businesses?
Well, it's really interesting. When IREN was looking to list in 2021, they actually first went to the ASX and the ASX told them to go away. The ASX was not interested in listing what at that stage was a Bitcoin miner. Now, the founders of IREN are two ex-Macquarie guys. They're actual brothers as well as crypto bros, and they would say, we're using our data centers for Bitcoin mining because that's the highest ROI we can get right now. But as soon as it's something else, we'll change. And that's what they're doing. So IREN then had to pivot to a NASDAQ listing. And it's interesting because the founders have also said they believe that the ASX rejection of their listing led to a bit of a chilling effect for other tech listings locally. So anyway, some people go to the US to do that listing. IREN's market cap as of today is about $15 billion US. So it's an interesting fork in the road for the company that they ended up on NASDAQ rather than the ASX. So going back to when they were using the data centers purely for Bitcoin mining, it did cause some issues that you wouldn't even necessarily think about. I won't go into specifics, just given that was from my time there, but the lack of familiarity with an industry like Bitcoin mining or the distrust of what it is could mean that some things that you would think would be a very straightforward thing to do become way more complicated. So something that for, a dairy business might take a day, might take us a month. And so there was often a bit of we were in a very fast-moving situation. We did a NASDAQ listing from start to finish in 3 months. We beat the lead underwriter's impossible timeline by 1 day. That nearly killed me, but anyway, I'm still here. And we were trying to build that whole governance system for the US market and the US expectations, while also just trying to do day-to-day business things that could be more complex than you would realize because of the industry that you're in. So I think that's probably similar for other newly emerging industries. And then, there's a lot of social license to operate and environmental risks coming up with data centers as well. And the regulatory space is sort of trying to quickly catch up to that. So for a board, I wasn't on the board, but I was company secretary. It's obviously a very fast moving space.
Yeah, wow. Such an interesting world, I think. And sitting in all those board meetings that you have, it would be kind of interesting watching how decisions are made along the way. Speaking about boards, you've served on the board of Melbourne Writers Festival, and for anyone think that's a small organisation, of course it's not. And of course, Writers Festivals have had an interesting year, and you are currently a member of the Compliance Audit and Risk Committee for the Australian Festival Chamber of Music. You clearly love the power of the arts and music. Can you tell us why and the challenges and joys of these board roles?
I do. So I think I have 3 passions in my life: the arts, gender equity, and the energy transition. That's sort of what I have come to realise this year. Everything's in one of those 3 buckets. So I just think the arts bring us joy, they bring us community, they allow us to reflect, they help us build empathy. If you're feeling alone and then you read a book and you go, oh God, I am not actually the first person that's ever been in this situation, So it does help you feel that connection in a way that very little else does. I know sports does in some ways for other people. And I think in this AI age, there's something profoundly human about the arts as well. So I love being in an audience. I used to do more, performing when I was in high school and stuff. But yeah, I just love it. On the flip side, as many people who are on NFT boards understand, it can be very challenging to be on these boards. There's often funding uncertainty. There can be a lack of understanding around the necessary governance. There can be some pushback, not only from management, but perhaps from other directors. I think particularly if you come from what they perceive as the bigger end of town, they can be concerned that you're trying to impose big end of town requirements on a very small organisation. And so trying to gently and appropriately sort of educate around what the baseline is, regardless of the size of the organisation, can take some time. I will confess there have been, not this year, but in the past there have been years where my NFP board role is about the only thing that has made me cry in terms of work. So it can be incredibly stressful. And a lot of it was around, we had from Melbourne Writers Festival, I forget what year it was, maybe 23 or 24, there was a time where one of the journalists at The Age decided there was a lot to write about us, and people resigned from the board, and it was just it was a huge amount of scrutiny, and it's very stressful. But I was really pleased with Melbourne Writers Festival. I stayed on to a stage. We had an amazing new festival director. We've had a couple of years where we've been able to do it in person. The finances are going great, and so getting I back in Brisbane for sort of over 5 years, the time was right for me to come on, and I'm super fortunate that I was asked to step onto the Compliance and Audit and Risk Committee for Australian Festival of Chamber Music, which is now in Cairns, and I went up there a couple of weeks ago for the opening weekend, which was fabulous, and then hopefully I'll be invited to join the board, in the next year or so.
Yeah, wow. You've also served on the board of Powerlink twice, between 2015 and 2016, and again from 22 to 25, which strikes me as a more regular term. Can you explain the two separate terms?
Yes, it is very odd. So Powerlink's a government-owned corporation. The government of the day makes the appointments. I was very fortunate to get asked to go on the board of Powerlink in 2015, which I did. And then I got the role at Jetstar in Melbourne, and I was moving to Melbourne. And so the chair at the time, Julie Beebe, said to me, look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. Go away and have a think and come back and talk to me. And I went away and had a think, and I came back and talked to her and said, look, I just think my energy, like this is a big role I'm taking on at Qantas. I really need to be fully present for that, and I'm not going to be in the state. And I think it's not going to be good for anyone, Powerlink or me, if I try to do both. And Julie said, yes, I think that's probably the right call. So I resigned from that, and I moved back to Brisbane at the end of 2020, and was very fortunate. It was funny, I got a call. People who've been through this process know you get a call, and they were saying, oh, we can't tell you which entity, but one entity, and please fill these forms in. And I thought, sure, it's not going to be Powerlink. And also there was someone on the Powerlink board at the time that had a similar skill set to me. Anyway, it all came out. They moved to be chair somewhere else, and I got asked to go back on the Powerlink board. So what was really interesting was how different the organisation was. So 2015-16, it was in contraction mode. There were people getting made redundant. It was about how do you redeploy people? How do you take care of the people who are exiting the business? By the time I rejoined, energy transition, taking on the copper string project, like employee growth through the roof. So two totally different sets of opportunities and problems for the board to deal with. And then so my term was 3 years. There was a change of government in Queensland about 18 months ago. I think I heard a stat recently at a Women on Board lunch that something like 76% of GOC appointed directors in Queensland had rolled over in that 12-month window. So I did at least get to the end of my term. So that was good.
Thank you. What's a governance failure, yours or one you've observed, that taught you something you still apply today?
Yeah. Look, I think one thing that often comes to mind is management of conflicts. And I've probably seen that in two different respects. One is the human nature for self-preservation is like in our DNA, literally, right? So when people are under pressure, I have to say there have been times where I've gone, are you really acting in the best interest of the organisation, or is a bias slipping in where you're actually trying to protect yourself? So I think that's something if we can all be self-aware of, particularly in incredibly stressful, a crisis or a regulatory investigation, something like that. And if you don't feel you can act in the best interest of the organisation, have a think about whether you should stay on as director, or if maybe the time has come for you to depart and take care of yourself. And then also, people just seem very unwilling to accept there might be a perception of a conflict. So they just keep arguing, but there isn't a conflict. And you go, okay, that's great. I understand that you believe there is no conflict. But I guess for me, if it's not black or white, I don't like dabbling in the grey when it comes to conflicts. I just don't think it can end well for you reputationally. I think it can end badly for the organisation. So that's something that I'm quite adamant about, and making sure you think about perception as well as actual conflicts.
Looking ahead, what governance issue or issues do you think Australian boards are currently underestimating?
Yeah, I know everyone talks about AI, but I think we have to talk about AI. And it's something I've had a bit of downtime this year as I've been serving my benevolent Year 12 teenage overlord. So I've been doing a lot of courses and a lot of reading, and I just don't think we have grasped what is coming. I know I don't grasp what is coming. So I've got that much knowledge. You know, I signed up for a University of New South Wales does a learning to lead every year, and this year it was about leading people through technological change. And the AI expert was just talking about the exponential rate of change that is coming in the next 5 to 10 years. And I don't think we've grasped that. He was also talking about, and sorry, I've got a little note on this because I thought it was really interesting. Our brains are linear, they're not exponential, and our brains haven't evolved in an exponential world. They've evolved in a linear world. So we tend to think in linear terms, and we have a cognitive bias to not see exponential change. So I think he's quite concerned about how unprepared we all are for what is coming. And that's going to have risks both for society as a whole and opportunities, but also for organizations. So I think boards need to, and this is not, I'm not, saying anything new here. Boards need to be thinking about AI inherently in their corporate strategy, not having an AI strategy that sits off to the side. How does AI support your core business objectives? What is your ROI? How are you going to measure ROI on AI investment? What resources do you need? What's your risk appetite around AI? How will you govern the use of it? And then who's actually going to be making decisions? Who's responsible for that? And when does the machine make a decision? And when does it get escalated to a human or to management or even to the board? And then I think we need to be talking more around the human impact of what's coming as well, from a change management point of view, mental health of employees, their productivity impacts. And I think how your organization does with AI will be made or broken around that human engagement with your staff and your employees. And going back to the exponential change, what's worked in the past isn't necessarily what's going to work in the future. And when you think about the demographics of most directors, myself included, perhaps in their 50s and 60s, I think it's an interesting one where we start thinking again about skill set diversity and age diversity in terms of making sure boards are equipped to deal with what's coming. Or whether you think about using an advisory board or something like that where you can bring in the right advice.
You've been a WOB member for many years, thank you. And in that time, as we've discussed, your career's been diverse, your board career's really taken off as well. Looking back on your journey, how important has WOB and the WOB community been to you?
So, I actually studied women's studies at uni. When I was at Harvard, I was on the Women's Law Journal board staff, so things to do with women and women's networks and gender equity and, helping women advance and all of those things have been hugely important to me. So when WOB started, I don't know if I was the first person to sign up, but I was, an early adopter of WOB for sure. And I love that you exist, and I want to thank you and Ruth for starting WOB so long ago and supporting all of us. It's a great community. I think, for people, don't be afraid to ask for help. One of the best things I ever did, and I didn't see this person at a WOB event, but she is a female director. I just emailed someone and said, hi, I saw you speak at this thing. Like, could we have a coffee? And we went and had a coffee, and they finally obviously decided I was worthy of imparting advice to. And they said, oh, everyone says it's who you know. And I said, yeah, that's right. And they said, no, that's wrong. It's not who you know, it's who knows you and what you want to do and what you're looking for. And that is exactly how almost every board opportunity I've had has come about, because someone will ring me and say, are you still looking for a board role? Or someone will say to a law firm partner, I need a woman in Brisbane with energy and resources and risk and governance experience who wants to be on a board. Do you know anyone? And they go, oh my God, you should talk to Joanna. So that's a bit of advice I'd give to people. And then coming back to how that relates to WOB, I think don't be afraid to reach out for people. And I've been the beneficiary of advice from people, and I still am, from people like Andrew Staines and Janice Van Rijk and all these amazing women that I know. And then I look back over my WOB time. Sue Forrester was our mentor for our cohort in the Next Generation program. Jackie McGill was in that cohort with me, and I had a really difficult work situation when I was around that time. And I remember being on the train and talking to Jackie, who was back in Adelaide, and I was really upset, and they just gave me the best advice. So, you know, I feel like I've been the beneficiary for a long time, and now it's kind of getting to the point where I'm still benefiting, but I'm also here to help. And so I would just say to the younger members, like, don't be afraid to reach out and ask. You know, people are very good about it, and my theory is always what goes around comes around. So people are very kind to me, and I try to help people coming up behind me as well. So thank you again.
Thank you. It's a real tribe, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that makes a difference, is find your tribe. And I think that makes your life, as I said, richer, but also enables you to deal with those complex issues and things in those moments when you are crying on the train or in the bathroom. And
or in the car. Or
Great stories. Tell me, as the number of women on boards continues to grow, so we've really addressed, I think, the gender diversity issue, but of course there is so much diversity within gender. And what do you see as some of the next frontiers?
Yeah, I mean, I was, because I've watched some of the other podcasts, so I knew you were going to ask me this, and I've been thinking about it. I mean, a lot of it is keep doing what you're doing, because I think it's fantastic. I do think focusing on human connection, particularly, you know, as technology continues to accelerate at a great rate of change, because I feel like, as we just talked about, those human connections, those networks, that community is going to be even more and more valuable as technology sort of becomes a bigger and bigger part of our life, and helping to equip the WOB members to sort of, you know, be able to deal with the brave new world that we are entering.
And finally, what are 3 words that you'd use to sum up your journey over the past 20 years?
Yeah. So I think I have to go with resilient, because definitely a lot has happened, and I'm sure more is to come. Adaptable and curious.
Joanna, thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Claire.